Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So I'm going to get started in a couple of minutes. I want to give people time to tune in. And before I get started, I want to wish each and every one of you a happy Thanksgiving. You know, we all have a lot to be thankful for. So I'm going to wait just a couple of minutes for a few people to join before I get started. You know, I want to thank you all for watching my channel, for supporting my channel. Again, I want you to all to help me reach my goal of 10,000 subscribers before the end of the year. So encourage your friends to subscribe to my channel, you know, share my videos, like my videos, support the channel, and hit the notification bell so that way you will know right away when I post new content. You know, there's an issue on YouTube, you know, they don't promote certain videos to the same extent as they promote other videos. So just so that you will know when I post content, just hit that notification bell. So I'm going to start off by sharing my screen, if you all can bear with me. There's this troubling story out of Baltimore, where I live, that I wanted to share with you all. This is a story that I meant to talk about a few days ago, but I'm going to talk about it now. So you have a 5-year-old girl by the name of Amy Hayes who was shot in West Baltimore. Now she's expected to survive her injuries, but I just want to talk about this situation. I mean, this is another terrible incident of crime that is taking place in the city. And the thing that makes this story unique is the fact that in July, her older sister, who's 7 years old, was shot and killed while riding in the back of a car. And I did a prior video on that subject, and I'm going to show that video to you for those of you who aren't familiar with the video that I posted before. You know, I did this video right here and a second video about this as well. But this 7-year-old girl right here was shot and killed, and now her 5-year-old younger sister was shot and injured. And I'm going to go into some of the details about what happened. So this is the girl. Her name is Amy Hayes, again, shot while going to the store. So the police say that she was shot around 6:20 p.m. I think this was on Monday. She was caught in the crossfire between two groups of people. You know, they were shooting at each other. And this girl just happened to be going to the store, going to the local corner store to get some items from that store. And while walking to that store or walking from the store, she was shot. And she was shot in the groin. You know, once she was shot, as this article points out, she dropped the baby doll that she was carrying and some money that she was carrying. Now, the police are still looking for who's responsible for this crime. You know, this is a horrible situation. I mean, again, you know, her sister was killed and now she was shot. You know, just an innocent girl minding her own business, trying to go to the store and come home, and she's caught in the middle of this crossfire. And this just brings attention to this issue of violence. And I just wanted to take some time to just share my thoughts about, you know, the problem of inner city violence in America and about what we can do to address it. You know, I've done several videos on this subject, but, you know, when I saw this story, I was like, I have to talk about this. I have to discuss this. Just bear with me a second. I need to get my other screen up here. And when people hear about these types of stories, you know, their first instinct is to blame the parents. You know, and I was reading this other article, and I'll post a link to that article in the description box as well, where someone was basically responding to people who wanted to attack the parents. You know, the first thing that they asked is like, why is a 5-year-old walking to the store at 6 p.m. at night? Like, why is this little girl going to the store at that age. Like somebody should be walking with her. She shouldn't be going to the store. Somebody should be supervising her. And if somebody was there, maybe she wouldn't have gotten shot, or if she was at home where she belongs, she wouldn't have gotten shot. First of all, I'll say a couple of things. First of all, I wouldn't allow my, daughter at that young age to go to a store by herself. So I understand why people express that concern. But the fact of the matter is whether or not she was with her parents, they still would have been caught in that crossfire. Even if she was with her parents, she would have been caught in that crossfire. If that was anybody else, like an adult could have been walking around in the city at that particular time, at that particular location, and they could have been caught in the crossfire. So I think that the easy thing that people like to do is point the fingers at the parents, just like people like to point the fingers, at single Black mothers. That's the first easy target that a lot of people go for. They try to blame inner city violence on single parent, single Black mothers. That's the first thing that they do. They try to make it seem like they bear the burden of all the problems in the Black community. And, they'll take a crime like this and they'll say, well, it's the single Black woman who's responsible for it. She's the one that raises the kids and all this and that. And, to me, that's just scapegoating, Black women in particular, and just Black people, is buying into this narrative that somehow many of these problems that exist in our community are due solely to Black pathology. And that's not the case. So let's talk about, some of the causes of this inner city violence, because you can't address the problem without addressing the cause of it. Most of these types of shootings occur in poor communities that lack job opportunities, communities with failing schools, with inadequate resources, high poverty rates. And you create an environment like that, that environment becomes ripe for crime. That environment becomes ripe for guns and drugs. And once you put, the guns in there and the drugs in there, you're going to have crime. When people don't have any legitimate way to earn a living, they're going to get caught up in the drug trade. And often in the drug trade, people have to, they use weapons to defend their markets and stuff like that, their territory, and it results in violence like we saw here in Baltimore a couple of days ago, where you have a young person, a 5-year-old child caught up in the mix, just walking around minding her business. She's not in the gang lifestyle or anything like that. She's not a participant in the criminality. She's a helpless victim. And, that whole crime situation is generated by the poverty. When you don't have these opportunities, all you have to do is put in, you put in these types of ingredients. You add the guns and the drugs, and you're going to have violence. If you were to take any other group of people and deprive them of, all these opportunities, and then tell them, well, hey, you can make money selling drugs, and then you give them guns and all that kind of stuff, you're going to have conflict. And we know about the role of, the CIA in terms of, promoting the drug use in our community, drug selling and stuff. It's well documented that the CIA helped bring a lot of these drugs into our communities, resulting in the destruction of our communities. So you can't have a discussion about inner city violence without addressing poverty in our community. You can't have a discussion about inner city violence without addressing unemployment in our community. You can't have a discussion about inner city violence without addressing the failing schools, because often, a lot of the people that are involved in this drug trade and stuff like that are people that didn't finish high school and stuff like that. They didn't go to college. Most, I would say well over 90% of the people that are participating in the drug trade, in these inner cities are uneducated. They didn't go to college. They didn't have an opportunity to pay their tuition to go to college and to become, some middle-class person living in an affluent neighborhood. There is no coincidence that this violence plagues poor communities. And, as long as there's no war on poverty, then there will continue to be this endless cycle of violence that we see in our communities. You know, if they were to wage a war on poverty to the same extent that they wage a war on drugs, then perhaps, you know, we would be somewhere near a solution. And it's like, there are many layers to this problem. Of course, there's the role of the parents, you know, in terms of raising their children. But too often people want to place all of the responsibility on the parents. You know, there is a role for the parents, you know, without a doubt, because even if someone lives in a toxic environment, they can still avoid, you know, getting, you know, in some cases they can avoid getting caught up in drugs. You know, because a lot of times in these communities, the people that are engaged in the drug trade, they don't represent the majority of the people in the community. The people that are, you know, quote unquote, gang banging or participating in violence, they represent a minority in the community. And there are plenty of people that are hardworking in these poor, you know, communities and stuff like that, that are striving to do better and get better and stuff like that. So with the right kind of values, somebody can avoid getting caught up in gangs or getting caught up in drugs and all that kind of stuff. So that does play a role, without a doubt. But if you have a certain environment, you know, that's ripe for criminality and stuff like that, even though you may have individuals that are able to, you know, transcend that environment, you know, that are going to excel despite that environment, many others will get caught up in that cycle. You know, the cycle that goes from poverty and, you know, the school to prison pipeline and, you know, the inner city violence and all that kind of stuff. They get caught up into that. So, yeah, so that has to be, you know, it has to be addressed. So you have the parental responsibility that plays a role, but it's not the sole cause of this violence. You also have community responsibility, man. That has to be, you know, an important ingredient in this stuff. You know, there was a time when there was a sense of community where parents intervened in children's lives. Like, even if the kids weren't your children, you were like their extended family, and you would check on them and you would report bad activity early on so that later on they wouldn't get caught up in certain lifestyles and stuff like that, get caught up in the criminal justice system. You had a checks and balances type of situation where, you know, people would discipline other people's children for getting out of line and getting out of pocket and all that kind of stuff, for being disrespectful. But nowadays that doesn't happen. You got children that, you know, show no respect for their elders at all, because everybody has a hands-off policy. They have a mind your own business type of policy. They don't have, you know, the collective responsibility type of mentality. So it's like a every person for themselves type of situation. And that's not a community. We need to redevelop the sense of community and, you know, monitor what children are doing early on so that they don't later on get caught up into this criminal lifestyle. And community responsibility also involves, you know, having a culture where you don't tolerate crime, where you stand up to the criminals in your community. Like what we have now is like a don't snitch mentality and stuff. And I understand that to some degree. You know, I understand why people have that mentality. For instance, you have a police force that doesn't protect citizens, that report crime and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, if somebody reports crime, you know, they end up getting killed or something like that. But if you have the collective community saying that we are not going to tolerate crime in our community, we're going to report criminal activity. You know, we're going to do everything that we can to prevent crime in our neighborhood, then you may have a different situation. If you had community patrols, if you had neighborhood watch programs, even in the hood, you could have those kind of programs. If you had those kind of programs, then perhaps that would help to reduce the crime in some of these poor Black communities. And, you know, part of the thing is this, man, you have to have good relationships between the police and the community, man, if you want to end this type of violence. You know, and that's why, you know, this whole issue of police brutality is, you know, important. That's why this issue of racial profiling is important. A lot of times you have these people that say, well, as soon as somebody brings up racial profiling or police brutality, the first thing that they'll say is, what about Black on Black violence? Not realizing that you can't address Black on Black violence if you don't have good relationships between the people and the police. If the people can't trust the police, then they are not going to report crimes to the police. They're not going to work with the police to prevent crimes, to prevent incidents like this. You have to redevelop those relationships between the police and the community. And the best way to do that is by, police departments implementing policies to get rid of racial profiling, implementing policies to get rid of excessive use of force. When you have those kind of relationships with the community is more likely to report crimes to the police. The community is more likely to collaborate with the police in terms of neighborhood watch programs and patrols of certain communities. This kind of stuff is nothing new, like community watches, that goes on in all kinds of communities. It's more common in affluent communities, but there's no reason why we can't have that in poor communities as well. Poor people, just like any other group of people, care about safety. They want safety in their community. They want to have a prosperous community, a clean community, an upstanding community. And, it's just about those of like minds getting together to try to make that happen. So that's very important. And then, aside from community responsibility, you also have, but before I go on to the next piece, I'll just say this, like in Baltimore, like in the suburbs of Baltimore, you have groups, for instance, that do community patrols, like in the Jewish community, like in the Pikesville area of Maryland. You have like groups that did patrols and stuff like that and looked out for, crimes and all that kind of stuff. There's no reason why we can't replicate that in Black communities, have patrols and stuff like that. And it's my understanding that in Detroit, like they had the Detroit 300, they had groups like that. And we need to have more of those types of groups to deal with this criminal element within our community. So, it's a multi-pronged, way to address this problem. So there's the city government role as well. You have these mayors in place that aren't doing enough to address the problem of crime in communities. And those types of mayors, those types of politicians, whether we're talking about your city council person that's responsible for that particular district, or we're talking about the mayor, they need to be held accountable. If they're not addressing crime, they need to be voted out of office. If they don't have a concrete plan to stem the violence that plagues certain communities, they need to be voted out of office. Too often you have politicians whose primary focus is pleasing corporate America, and more affluent neighborhoods. They're concerned about pleasing those people who fund their campaigns, and they're concerned about pleasing those who tend to vote more than others. In those affluent communities, you have higher voter turnout. So in the minds of a lot of these politicians, those communities become more relevant than poor, struggling communities. And that's part of the reason why turning out the vote is so important. We need to mobilize the vote in these poor communities, poor Black communities, and harness that power so that we can get the kind of change that we need, so that we can make sure that they prioritize important issues like this inner city violence, like this situation involving this young girl shot, just minding her own business, caught in the crossfire and stuff. Yeah, so they bear a responsibility, man, in terms of like the quality of the education that our children receive, ensuring that, they have quality education so that they can move on in life and go to college or go to a trade school and become productive citizens in the society. When you don't have educational opportunities, what else is there for you to do? If you can't rap or you can't play some kind of sport and you don't have an education, like what else can you do? And then you have people presenting to you opportunities to make a lot of money fast selling drugs. Unfortunately, a lot of people are going to get caught up into that. So, you know, you need a collaboration between city government, state government, and corporate America to try to bring in opportunities to address these problems. And you also have to deal with environmental issues as well. Like here in Baltimore, lead paint is a major problem in many communities in Baltimore. Those are literally toxic environments. If somebody is living in a home with lead paint, that's going to affect their development. It's going to affect their reasoning skills and all that kind of stuff. So this problem is multifaceted, man. You got to incorporate, you know, environmental justice issues. You have to deal with poverty. You have to deal with criminal justice and all these things. And you have to deal with this problem of gun control. And, you know, the gun control issue goes beyond Maryland, because a lot of times what happens is, you know, the guns that end up in the illegal gun trade are often purchased legally at first and then sold in the black market. You know, they're purchased in places that have less regulations on guns. You know, purchased in places where they have these gun shows and you can buy a large number of weapons and stuff like that without presenting all these credentials and stuff like that that you need to present in an ordinary transaction at an ordinary gun shop. And those types of loopholes make it possible for the streets of Baltimore to be flooded with illegal guns eventually. And so we need to have like federal gun control laws that prevent those types of loopholes. And again, that's another reminder of how important voting is and lobbying for our interests are. So yeah, I mean, I just wanted to get on here and just share my views about this, man. You know, and this violence, like, I mean, the federal government has a role in terms of funding education in poor neighborhoods as well. You know, the state government can do more to fund education and fund, you know, creating jobs and all that kind of stuff. That's one of the few ways that you can, you know, fight this problem. And just in terms of community responsibility, I want to just lift up some things. You know, there are groups out here that are trying to take responsibility and trying to make a difference. Like often you have this false narrative put out here that Black communities don't care about inner city violence. Black communities only care when a white man or a white person kills a Black person or when a police officer kills a Black person. And that's simply not true. There are organizations, for instance, like Baltimore Ceasefire here. And I'm going to share my page again so that you all can see this briefly. But they need help. These organizations need help. They need our support. And here's one. You know, I've attended a couple of meetings of Baltimore Ceasefire. I need to be more engaged, more involved. Also, there's another group called Shoot Zone here in Baltimore that fights against this inner city violence. These types of groups deserve the support of the community. You know, not only financial support, like from these people that have all these resources, like, you know, these celebrities. They need to give money to groups like Baltimore Ceasefire. They need to give money to groups like the No Shoot Zone here in Baltimore. And also, and more importantly, individuals need to give their time and actually get engaged and walk the streets and protest against this inner city violence and talk to people to try to stem this violence. If we are able to like try to negotiate peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis, then why can't we try to have peace negotiations in Black neighborhoods between rival gangs and, you know, rival organizations, you know, whether they're gangs or groups that are engaged in other types of illegal activity. There need to be negotiations to try to resolve a lot of these conflicts that lead to this violence. So, and the only people that can do that are people that have street credibility. I mean, one of the groups that I mentioned, no shoot zone, they have people in there that have street credibility, that actually talk to people that are engaged in this activity to try to stem the violence. And we just need to have more of that, more negotiations. And as I said before, you have the problem between the police and the community, and obviously the police can't serve as mediators between these rival groups that are engaged in this type of violence. In the past, you've seen groups like the Nation of Islam take on that role. That's something that church communities can do. You have a large presence of churches and mosques and synagogues in Baltimore. The religious community needs to get together and get involved. Get involved and try to resolve a lot of this conflict that exists in our community. Too often the churches just aren't concerned about those types of issues. They're not as involved as they should be. So we have to take responsibility. And, one thing that my imam always says is that it's our community and our responsibility. So, it's our responsibility as parents, it's our responsibility as communities and neighborhoods. It's the responsibility of the local government, the state government, and the federal government to address this issue. I mean, you have, like, for instance, this opioid crisis, like, because that has impacted so many white people in large, alarming numbers. All of a sudden, it's like some state of emergency, and it's receiving all this attention and et cetera, all these resources. The same should happen when it comes to this inner city violence problem. And although, there's been records about like how violence is going down, more needs to be done to address the violence. You have places like Chicago where you see all this violence that happens, where you have all these multiple shootings over holiday weekends and things like that. Something needs to be done. And if these elected officials, again, aren't addressing the problems, they need to be voted out. And the only person that should be voted for is somebody that can present a clear, concrete plan on how to address these problems. So, yeah, so I'm going to go through your comments before I close out. I want to thank y'all for tuning in. I truly appreciate it. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone. I appreciate you taking your time out on this holiday to check out this live stream. And I just want to let y'all know from here on out, I'm probably just going to do a lot of live streams instead of, uploading videos and stuff like that. Depending on the content of the videos, it's just easier and more convenient. And I like to be interactive. I like the fact that we're able to talk as I'm talking about different issues. Yeah, so sister said a 5-year-old shouldn't be walking alone anywhere, but it's no one's fault but the shooter. Yeah, that's true. Like, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't let my 5-year-old like walk around, go to the store. Like, to me, that's just irresponsible, man. But at the end of the day, it's those shooters who are responsible for the girl getting shot. She was shot in the groin area. That's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it's crazy that you have this stuff going on where people can be safe just walking on the street in their own neighborhood, minding their own business. That could have been anybody. And, it's a 5-year-old girl, man. And that's the reason why this should be something that is of utmost concern to all of us, because anybody can be caught up in this random gunfire. I mean, it's more likely, obviously, in those types of communities and in poor urban areas and stuff like that, you're more likely to have that situation occur, but this can affect anybody. So we all, regardless of our income, regardless of our education, regardless, in fact, of our race, we need to be concerned about the lives of fellow human beings. So, yeah, I mean, that's a valid point. The shooter bears responsibility for all of this. Yeah, so somebody said single mothers and parents are a part of the problem. I don't know. I don't know if you can blame single parent. First of all, I don't think that that's the case. I don't think that a single parent household is solely to blame for the problem or is a major part of the problem. Because the fact of the matter is, there are plenty of people who are raised in single parent households that do not get involved in criminal activity, that do not get involved in gangs and don't sell drugs, that live productive, uh, and prosperous lives. So, to place all the, to place a significant part of the burden on the Black woman's back or, single mother's back, it's just wrong. It's illogical. Um, and it's weak, man. It's the weak way out. Instead of dealing with the hardcore issues like, the poverty, dealing with the issue of institutionalized racism, which is a key component. You wouldn't have ghettos if it wasn't for institutionalized racism. Decades of policy designed to segregate communities, decades of policy designed to cut Black people out from, building wealth in their community, from, owning property and stuff. So it's a large, there are many causes of the problem, and too often what we do is we try to, scapegoat Black women. And the fact of the matter is, like, if you want to point to single Black mothers, you also have to point your finger back at the single Black men that help create single Black mothers. But people don't want to deal with that. Often they want, a lot of it's real popular here on YouTube to just talk about how the single Black woman is to blame for all this stuff, not bearing in mind that it takes two people to have a child, and the child is the responsibility of both people. And another thing is like that whole single parent issue. One of the problems is like people overblow it, by basically suggesting that Black men are absent from their children's lives. And there have been studies done. Like one of the studies is the Center for Disease Control. They released a study that just basically talked about how Black men are more involved in their children's lives than other groups of men are. So to try to place all the blame on the single parent household is, just wrong. It's just illogical. It is not the primary cause or even like a major cause for the violence that we see. Of course, I think that parents do play some kind of role, but it's not as large of a role as people try to make it out to be. They try to place the blame solely on this single parent household issue. And it's not about just that. It's about like what kind of values you raise children with. It's about like the opportunities that certain children have, and it's about the environment in which they're living in. So let me continue on. Oh, Water Sniper said, did I hear about a 14-year-old pregnant Black girl in Atlanta who was shot dead in the back of the head in her home while babysitting her younger family member? No, I didn't hear about that, man. But it's like these types of um, acts and violence, they occur all around this country, man. And it's like, how are we going to address this problem? And one thing that has to be addressed is this culture of violence. That's one thing that I forgot to mention. You have a whole culture that celebrates guns. And I'm not just talking about hip hop music. I'm talking about like Hollywood, for instance. They celebrate violence, celebrate gangsters. And then, you have this music industry, hip hop, that celebrates drug dealing, celebrates the gang lifestyle, as I discussed in my most recent video on Tekashi 6ix9ine. Yeah, you have the celebration of this stuff, a celebration of violence, a celebration of being a gangster, a drug dealer, and all that kind of stuff, a criminal. And then we wonder why you have people participating in this violence and this crime and all this stuff and gangs and all that kind of stuff. We wonder why after we have a society that celebrates that. On the radio, we hear these songs all the time glamorizing gang lifestyle, glamorizing, shooting people and all that kind of stuff. But, again, I can't place all the blame on the music alone. Again, I think these economic issues are, a bigger factor. I think the issue of institutionalized racism is a big factor. The problem with, the availability of guns in communities and drugs, those play a bigger role than the music. But I think that the music is a factor that cannot be ignored. The culture is a factor that cannot be ignored. And even like, the values that some parents raise their children with can't be ignored. Yeah, that's crazy, man. A 14-year-old pregnant girl shot in the back of the head, man. That's insane. Yeah, so this person, David Monroe, says you got a big heart for the predators in the community. How do I have a big heart for predators in our community when I'm saying that we need to address them, when I'm saying that we need to have community patrols and we need to have better relationships with the between the community and the police to make sure that these people are off the streets? How is that having a big heart for predators? I mean, that's nonsense. And crime doesn't cause poverty. I mean, people, if you look at who's actually involved in the drug trade in these inner cities and these gangs, you will see that more likely than not, a lot of the people that are involved in that trade are people that lack resources, people that are poor, people that don't have an education, people that don't have the ability to make a similar amount of money in legal employment. So they go the illegal route. And it's just that simple. I mean, all you have to do is look at the numbers in terms of the inner city violence, like who's responsible for the violence, who's committing the violence, and what kind of education they have, what kind of economic background they came from. And you will see that poverty plays a big role in the violence that you see in places like Baltimore. It's no coincidence that here in Baltimore, like the violence that you see are in these areas where you have a concentration of generational poverty. That's where you see the violence. You don't see the violence in a place like Roland Park or some other affluent area of Baltimore. So like, I mean, I don't know why people see, it's easy to just place all the blame on Black pathology than it is to address the real problems that are causing this violence that we see. To address the poverty, to address the lack of resources and the lack of educational equity. Those are harder issues to address. And these conservatives try to duck those issues and they try to place all the blame on the back of the Black woman. Just bear with me. I'm looking at these comments. Yeah, so a dude's thought said, as far as college is concerned, you can get loans for that. There's plenty of government loans to go to school. I have relatives who grew up in bad areas that went to college. I'm not saying that everybody that grows up in a bad area, I mean, I don't know what your deal is, man. I don't get it. I'm not saying that everybody in poor neighborhoods don't have a chance to go to college. That's not what I said at all. At the beginning of this, I mentioned how there are people who, despite their environments, were able to get an education or, to excel and all that kind of stuff. I mentioned that. But the fact of the matter is, when you look at the numbers, they don't represent the norm in poor neighborhoods. They don't represent the norm. And before you can even get into college and apply for a loan, you have to have in education, you have to go to high school and excel in high school and all that kind of stuff and qualify to get admitted into these colleges and universities. But often, based on the lack of educational resources, a lot of times young people aren't steered in that direction. A lot of young people don't even finish high school. So you have to address those issues. You have to address the inadequate funding in poor Black communities for education. When you compare the quality of education that people in these white affluent neighborhoods and suburbs get compared to poor urban neighborhoods, there's no comparison. So when it comes to college admissions and all that kind of stuff, African American students aren't on a level playing field. So that's one thing. And then you just have a lot of issues that make it hard for somebody to learn. If somebody is trying to survive, to have food on their plate and all that kind of stuff, they're not going to be focused on education when they're hungry and stuff like that, when they don't know where their next meal is coming from, or they have, unstable homes and all that kind of stuff. So it's like you have to deal with all these different issues. I'm not saying that people can't get student loans and go to college. I mean, there are plenty of people that do. I grew up in an inner city neighborhood and all that kind of stuff, and I got student loans and I went to college, but everybody doesn't have those same opportunities. Everybody doesn't have the same supportive environment around them that enables them to go to college. So it's not just a matter of people basically being lazy and not taking advantage of opportunities. There are a lot of obstacles that are in people's way. And I think that instead of ignoring those obstacles, we need to address them. Instead of placing all the burden on the individual and saying it's just about personal responsibility, we need to deal with these issues of poverty, these issues of inadequate education, the issue of unemployment, the issues of institutionalized racism in terms of, the lack of resources and, the lack of wealth building in Black communities and all that kind of stuff. So, so I'm not saying that there's not I mean, like Frankie said here, Frankie said most of them barely finished high school. College isn't even an option for a lot of them, as Frankie said here. I mean, you have, high dropout rates in in a lot of these communities that are poor and struggling and stuff. So to throw out college out here like that's the solution to everything, and that it's available to everybody, it's just wrong. I mean, it's not factually accurate, man. If you don't have if you're not even able to complete high school because of all these different issues going on involving, your financial situation and stuff, then you can't even really talk about college as being some viable option for a lot of young people, man. You have to deal with a lot of issues. Like, I think that there are family counseling issues that need to be addressed. You have the drug epidemic that needs to be addressed. Like, for instance, some parents are on drugs and stuff like that. So they're not there for their children and stuff. So let me continue through your comments. I want to thank y'all for tuning in. Yeah, so Big Game said we could stand up to the criminals, but somehow, someone would tell on us for attacking or checking the criminals. And that's what happened to the Detroit 300. What I plan on doing is I want to do some research on the Detroit 300. And, so hopefully I'll be able to do that. I want to try to do that hopefully before the end of the year, do some comprehensive research on the Detroit 300 and what caused caused them to be disbanded and all that kind of stuff and what they actually accomplished. But yeah, I mean, you had groups like, for instance, the Guardian Angels, back in the day. I don't know how active they are today, but they addressed the issue of crime in certain neighborhoods. They patrolled certain neighborhoods and all that kind of stuff. I just think that those types of groups that are interested in like patrolling neighborhoods, obviously they need to consult lawyers to confirm, what their legal rights are in terms of how to address crime, in terms of their ability to carry weapons and stuff like that. Yeah, so I think that that's one of the key components to address your concern, Big Game. I think that those types of groups that are interested in doing those types of things, they need to consult with lawyers about what their rights are, so that they can ensure that whatever they're doing is within the law. And as long as you're operating in the law, it's going to be very difficult for somebody to shut your group down. All right, so yeah, that's a good point, Lola. About the lack of motivation. Um, and that's a real problem. I mean, first of all, you have a lot of people that don't value a college education. That's a reality. And then also you have failing schools. That's the component that a dude's thought is ignoring, like the fact that if you don't, well, he did say something about their schools suck or whatever. Yeah. So, I mean, the thing is, like, if you're not getting a quality education, it's going to be difficult for you to get admitted into anybody's college, whether or not you have a student loan or whatever. You can't even get a student loan until you are actually admitted to a college. So if you're going to a poor school that's not even giving you the basics, where you're on a remedial level and all that kind of stuff, it's going to be hard for you to get into college. And even if you get into college, it's going to be hard for you to stay into college and be competitive in college. Yeah, and that whole issue of student loans, I mean, student loans don't solve, it helps you get your education, but then when you get out of college, you're burdened with all this student loan debt that makes it hard for you to build wealth. It makes it hard for you to carry on wealth to your children and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother subject that needs to be addressed. And, those are great comments, Lola Jones. I appreciate your commentary. Yeah, I don't know about most young black males, but Big Game, I don't know about most black males not being equipped to go to college, but I know that there's a significant number of them who are not equipped because of the inadequate education that they received in high school and the lower grade levels. Oh, Frankie, oh, you live in Detroit? I'm originally from Detroit. You hate Detroit, the city. Yeah, I'm the opposite. I don't like, I'm not as crazy about like suburban areas or country areas. I like to be in the heart of the cities. I like cities like New York is one of my favorite cities. DC and all that kind of stuff. I love cities. Yeah, and I'm not downplaying the importance of parents, a dude's thoughts. I mean, I hear what you're saying. Like, parents should read to their children and all that kind of stuff. They should instill certain values in them in terms of, stressing the importance of education. So I'm not downplaying that at all. Shout out to Ghost Rider. Yeah, it is a multifaceted problem, Lola. As I was saying earlier, because it's like if there was an easy solution to this problem, it would have been solved like a long time ago. But I will say this, I mean, it's a man-made problem. The inner city violence that you see is a man-made problem, and it can be solved by men and women. You know, just like people said, well, you know, if we're able to create all this technology, for instance, you know, able to go to the moon, you know, able to create satellites and, you know, all this technology that we have, if we can do all those marvels, then obviously we have the capability of addressing this problem of inner city violence in these neighborhoods. We don't have to live like this as a society, man. We don't have to be a violent society. Poverty doesn't have to exist. You know, people had this idea that poverty, there's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing you can do about crime and violence. But we had a capability to end these things if we put our mind and our resources to it. We can make this world a better place. Yeah, so Frankie said they built $1 million schools in Detroit, yet no teachers, no textbooks, kids don't know PowerPoint. Yeah, I mean, one of the problems in Detroit, like with the schools, like, is the problem of depopulation. Like, so they've had to close a lot of schools and stuff like that um, because of, you know, people moving out of the city. So that's part of the problem. And then it's just a mess, man. It's just a mess. And, you know, these problems can't just be solved by you know, pouring money into certain areas and stuff like that. You have to change the values that people have as well. And, you know, so you can't just build up $1 million school or whatever without addressing the underlying issues of poverty in those communities as well. Because again, if somebody is hungry, if they have, you know, they lack housing and all that kind of stuff, the last thing they're going to be focused on is trying to be an excellent student. And if they like come from an environment that's toxic, where they literally have homes that are poisoned with lead, it's going to be harder for them to learn, harder for them to excel and all that kind of stuff. And we know, just anybody can search this in Baltimore, you know, lead paint is a major problem. Yeah, Roland Ford made a good point. Hold on one second. Just bear with me one second. Just bear with me one second. Roland Ford said, I feel sorry for black people who are trapped in high crime areas. The innocent children suffer the most. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's the sad thing. I mean, it's like as a child, you don't get to choose what neighborhood you live in or who your parents are. You're just born into a situation. I mean, here you have a 5-year-old who did nothing wrong. She didn't have control over what happened to her. The same is true for her younger sister who was shot and killed in the back of a car. She didn't have any say so in that situation. She bears no responsibility for that situation. And it's just so sad, man. And it's like the fact that our communities, I mean, we don't tolerate it. As I said, there are examples of groups that have done things and stuff like that, but we need more of that. We need more outrage in our community. We need more action in our community. We need more accountability in our community. Accountability for parents, accountability for the city government, the state government, and the federal government, and the community. So Frankie Robinson said, I reside next door to a church and they do not support the neighborhood. Yeah, I mean, it's just messed up, man. Like you have all these churches in all these Black communities, and some of them are doing good work, without a doubt. Let me be perfectly clear about that. But there's more that they can do. Many of these churches rake in a lot of money from their congregations. How much of that money is going into supporting the public schools? How much of that money is going into creating job opportunities for young people? How much of that, those resources and the time and the energy that the congregation has, how much of that is devoted to addressing the problem of violence in these neighborhoods? You know, whenever a group like, you know, Baltimore Ceasefire or No Shoot Zone hold a meeting, those meetings should be packed with members from these churches, from these mosques, and from, you know, synagogues and other religious institutions. But too often, you know, these people, they're only concerned with life after death, but they're not concerned with the life that we're living right now. Um, you know, of course, it's good to have the good in the hereafter, you know, and, you know, I believe in the hereafter, you know, I believe in the day of judgment and all that. But we need to take care of this life that we're living right now. We need to try to make this life heaven on earth. We need to have peace on earth. We need to have neighborhoods that are safe. That's what we need. And the churches can play a role in that, man. Instead of being concerned with, you know, building large cathedrals, you know, having fancy cars and all that kind of stuff, and living in fancy mansions outside of your neighborhood, outside of the community where you preach. They need to be about devoting those resources to the people. Need to be about creating services for the communities, being resources for the communities. Like, for instance, you have other churches, for instance, like there's a lot of criticism that people can legitimately throw at the Catholic Church because of the, you know, priests molesting congregants and all that kind of stuff. Yes, you can criticize them for that, and rightfully so. But at the same time, when you look at like the things that Catholics do, like the Catholic Church has all kinds of charity programs in communities, like soup kitchens, you know, they provide people with clothing and all other types of resources. Black churches need to do more of that kind of community service work. They need to be building hospitals, building and providing affordable housing for communities, safe housing, helping to fund public education. So there's far much more that the churches can do to help our communities to address this problem of violence that plagues our community. And I think that we need to actually hold the churches accountable, man. Ask them, like if you go to a church, you need to ask your pastor, like what is your pastor doing to address the problem of poverty in the community, to address the problem of unemployment in the community, to address the issue of education in the community, to address the problem of violence in the community. We need to ask these pastors and stuff like that, what are they doing to address these problems? Because if they're not addressing the real life concerns of the community, then they are irrelevant to the community. They are completely irrelevant. So Roland said, honestly, the government will never try to fix any of the systemic problems in urban communities. Yeah, if the government is left to its own devices, they will never do so. They will never do so. As long as we just allow things to continue as they are, as long as we don't put any pressure on the government, nothing will happen to address these problems. But it's when we apply pressure, when we have movements, that's when you can actually affect change. When we hold politicians accountable, that's when you can affect change, when they will address these problems. You know, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, and all that other civil rights legislation didn't pass because Congress developed a heart and had some concern for the community. Those things were a result of a movement in this country. They were the result of pressure applied in this country. And the same thing can be done, with respect to this issue of violence, with respect to the issue of unemployment and poverty. Those issues can be addressed by applying that kind of pressure to our elected officials. When corporations want things done, they apply pressure to government. When the Latinos or the LGBT community want things done, they apply pressure to the government. When the pro-Israeli lobby wants things done for Israel and the support of Israel, they lobby and pressure the government. And that's what we need to do. And that's what many of us are doing. So I don't think that we should sit back and have a woe is me type of attitude, I'm helpless type of attitude. I think that we need to do everything that we can in our power as parents, as members of the community, to affect change. And then we need to pressure government to address issues that are important to us like this. Yeah, so somebody said, do I ever listen to, those are some imams. I've listened to Siraj Wahaj. I listened to some of them. Like I listened to a couple of Imam Siraj. I don't want to mispronounce his last name, but I listened to a couple of excerpts from his sermons or whatever, just to respond to your question. But I don't follow them like that. I don't follow those individuals like that. And I'm only familiar with one of them, and that's Siraj. I'm only familiar with him in response to your question. Yeah, so you can send me that link, Water Sniper. I'm going to post my email address in the chat room so that you can send me the link. Again, I want to thank y'all for tuning in. It's New Possibilities blog at yahoo.com. All right, so let's see. All right, just bear with me. So a dude asked if I'm going to have any more debates. Yeah, I want to have more debates on here. As you all know, I put out my challenge to all those YouTubers. So far, Obsidian was the only one to respond. And for that, I respect him, despite the fact that I disagree with just about everything that comes out of his mouth. I respect the fact that he at least came here and debated me like a man. As far as like his tactics of trying to overtalk me and stuff like that, I don't respect that, but I respect the fact that he did have the gumption or the heart to come here and debate me live. And one thing I'll say about that real quick is, often people think that they can win a debate by talking the loudest, by talking over you. But really, a debate, like if somebody is really judging a debate, they go by like the strength of arguments. They go by your ability to rebut arguments and to provide counter arguments and stuff like that. And by that standard, clearly he didn't prevail in that debate. But again, I want to thank him for coming on here, having the courage to come on here. But yeah, I plan to have more debates. Again, my challenge is open. I still challenge all those, I'll challenge any black Republican that wants to debate whether black people should be Republicans or whether black people should support Donald Trump. I'll be happy to debate any of them anytime. I'll be happy to debate those don't vote people, those people that discourage black people from voting. I would debate any of them anytime. Again, I'll name some of the names. Cynthia G. I'll debate her anytime. On substance, I'm not going to deal with somebody again. I gave Obsidian a little bit too much leeway, but I'm not going to debate you. We're going to talk over me and be all loud, and all that kind of stuff and disrespectful. But I'll debate you on substance. So Cynthia G, Robert Perkins, Boyce Watkins. Let's see, Tehran Rain, all these other people that support this don't vote stuff. Tariq Nasheed, I'll debate him. The only thing with Tariq, I wouldn't go on his platform because he's goofy. Like he's more about roasting and stuff like that. So I probably wouldn't even actually debate him unless it's going to be a debate on substance where we actually talk about issues instead of having a roast session. So, yeah, so I want to have more debates on here. Yeah, I don't know if they accept criminal behaviors, Covina, man, but I do think that that more needs to be done to combat criminal activity, man. That don't snitch code and all that kind of stuff, that needs to go. But then, like, if it goes, we need to have something in place to protect the people so that they're not like retaliated against for reporting crime and all that stuff in the community. Yeah, so Water Sniper is on point. He said these simple-minded dudes act like black women had children all alone without a black man's sperm. We know that a man can be a deadbeat or that a woman can chase the man off. That can cause a single home. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously both parties have some role in creating a single parent household. And that's something that these guys like rarely address when they want to bash black women and stuff and blame black women for everything that happens in black communities. And again, just being in a single parent household doesn't mean that you're going to be a criminal or a gangster or any of that stuff. Exactly. Blessed one. Crime is a symptom of poverty. It's like people want to look at, instead of addressing like the root, they want to just chop away at branches. Like if you have a tree and you figure you can stop, the tree by chopping a couple of branches, that's silly because you chop some branches, another branch will grow out. And that's their approach to things. They don't have a total, their eye on the total picture, on the total causes of these things. Yeah, and the community activities piece, that's a very important piece, man. Like, as long as kids don't have anything to do, first of all, they're going to be on the streets and they're going to, they're going to be exposed to the violence and stuff like that. They're going to be exposed to drug trafficking and stuff like that if they're on the streets and stuff, like if they're not doing things. So we need to have more community centers in these areas and stuff. So if people are, playing sports during the, like, after school and they're being fed and stuff like that, given things to do that are productive and positive. And it's not just the athletics. You could have like poetry and writing and all that kind of stuff to inspire people to express themselves in other ways, to spend their time doing positive things instead of being on the street. We need to have more community engagement. We need to have more like extracurricular activities at schools, to make schools like community centers instead of just a place that you go to get an education and stuff. And then we need to also have, the traditional community centers as well. And that's one role that a church can play. The churches can play the role of community center, have activities for youth, not just the youth that go to your church, but the youth in your community. Just bear with me a second. Yeah, college is not a cure. I mean, it's not necessarily a cure all, but one thing that I'll say is this, man, people with a college education are less likely to be engaged in the violence that we see in the streets of Baltimore and places like Chicago. Yeah, so yeah, there are plenty of people with college degrees that can't find jobs. Yeah, that's true, depending on what your major was and stuff. Yeah, that's a good point, Roland Ford. Schools have to function as shelters and um, social services for poor students. Yeah, so they need to have more than just the traditional setup for schools in these poor neighborhoods. You know, a lot of times these students, they suffer from all kinds of trauma. You know, I have real close friends that are teachers. That work in these neighborhoods and stuff like that. These struggling communities. It's hard to focus on getting an education, for instance, if you're dealing with tragedy in your life, like if you have your parents being killed, your uncles being killed and stuff like that in the streets, you have parents strung out on drugs, you have problems being able to uh, find a meal, have dinner or breakfast and all that kind of stuff. So you need like you need social workers, you need counselors, you need food resources, and a lot of schools provide breakfast, they provide lunch and all that kind of stuff. But there need to be other things as well. Like you need to have after school activities for students to keep them engaged. And you need more parental involvement in education as well. That's another thing. So, everyone, the bottom line is everyone bears some responsibility for the violence that plagues our cities, man. And everybody should be held accountable. Whether you have children in the schools or not, you should realize how important this is. Whether you have children or not, this needs to be an issue that's of utmost importance to you, just as a, a Black person and just as a human being. Whether you live in these communities or not, you should try to give back to these communities. A lot of times people get education and they just bounce out of the community and leave the community behind, and they don't give back to the community. Yeah, that's an issue too. Learning disabilities. That's a very important issue that's not addressed. Like you have, and if certain learning disabilities aren't diagnosed, people aren't able to overcome them. Like if they're not aware that they have dyslexia or something like that, then they're not able to realize their full potential and all that kind of stuff. Because if someone knows about certain disabilities that they have, then there are ways that they can overcome them. In some cases, depending on the nature of the disability. I mean, like there's many people who have quote unquote learning disabilities, but they still become successful people and accomplished people. Yeah, and that whole piece that Frankie brought up about like the jobs being in the suburbs and stuff like that, that's very, I know that that's true in Detroit, and it's true in many urban areas. It's like you have to have transportation to get to jobs. And, you know, if you have very little resources, it's going to be hard for you to find transportation to go out there to apply for a job and then, you know, to go back and forth and all that kind of stuff without cars and stuff like that. And then you have inadequate public transportation in many communities, where it's difficult. Like you don't, it's not like many of these communities are not like New York City, where New York City, you can just hop on a subway and get anywhere you need to go. But in some communities, like you have unreliable bus service. You don't have, you know, the bus service is not adequate to get you to where you need to go to find jobs and stuff like that. So these are very real issues, man. And, you know, the lack of jobs is part of the reason why we see this violence. So Frankie asked if I'm a Orthodox Muslim or am I in the nation. You know, I am a Sunni Muslim. Um, I'm not in the Nation of Islam, you know, but I have respect for the Nation of Islam. Um, yeah, so that's just to respond to your question. And I may just have an interview session on here one day where y'all get to interview me. I tried to do that a while ago, but I may try to do it again. Just let me know if that's something that y'all would be interested in, just interviewing me and just asking me questions about, like, you know, my views, or, you know, on different topics, or, you know, just some basic information about me. You know, I'm willing to provide some information about, you know, my personal life, but not too much. I want to have some zone of privacy. Yeah, so a dude Start said the Detroit 300 were doing some good work, but they went beyond what they could legally do, and that was the problem. And he also said the same was true for the Guardian Angels. Yeah, I need to learn more about that. Yeah, those student loans ain't no joke. I may do a whole video. I could do a whole video just talking about that. Yeah, and that's a valid point. No frauds allowed. Like, I think that one thing is that a lot of people aren't aware of various resources, and that's one thing that we can do is let people know, like, about various resources in the community that they can take advantage of. You mentioned Job Corps programs and stuff, and you know there are summer programs in certain communities. And I know that when I was in Detroit, like one of the ways that they would try to address the problem of violence in Detroit is by giving young people jobs. You know, a lot of people want to, you know, one of the great things that Mayor Coleman Young did way back in the day is that during the summers, he would set up summer youth programs, you know, work programs, so that way, you know, young people would have jobs, they would have some money in their pocket, they would learn about, you know, financial responsibility. They would learn what it's like to have a job and to be responsible. And also, it would keep them busy most of the day so they wouldn't have time to engage in criminal activity. So we need more of those types of programs in communities. And those are things that can be done. It's my understanding that, if I'm not mistaken, uh, in Newark, New Jersey, they have similar programs where they have summer job programs for youth. That's what you can do. That's an example of how public policy can make a difference. That's an example of how important elections are. We need to have people in office that realize the importance of these types of programs, you know, realize the importance of employing the youth. to give them something to do and to help them earn a living so that they won't have to be out here on these streets selling drugs and stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a valid point, and that's one of the things that the group Baltimore Ceasefire does here in Baltimore. Like they let people know about various resources. They are in touch with different agencies and groups around the city that provide different resources to the community, and they inform the community about these resources. So yeah, that's a very valid point. Just bear with me 1 second. Shout out to Ron Brown for your donation. You know, I truly appreciate it. Okay. Yeah, sometimes this bounces around, so y'all gotta forgive me. Hold on 1 second. Yeah, it's not, I mean, that's a good point, Coco Ness Fox. Job programs don't cover everybody, but at least it covers some people. And you know, people should be aware of that so that they can have an opportunity to participate in like the Job Corps and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I hear your point. We need more of those types of programs. They need to be expanded. Yeah, and that issue about criminal records that Coco Ness Fox brought up, um, that's an important issue as well. Like criminal records, like create a barrier that makes it hard for somebody to re-enter society. It makes it hard for them to find employment and other things, and then they end up back in the criminal lifestyle and back in jail. So we need to have, you know, programs that make it possible for them to re-enter society and have opportunities. We need to have more expungement done of people's records. We need to do away with these requirements that automatically um, prevent somebody from getting a job just based on their criminal history. Um, you know, there have been efforts, for instance, like Ban the Box, which basically says that in the first part of the application process, they don't just screen somebody out automatically based on a criminal history. So yeah, we need all those things, man. Shout out to Lola Jones. You know, I appreciate your comment, you know, asking why I'm not a bigger YouTuber. I appreciate that. Hopefully I will, you know, hopefully this channel will grow, and I want to at least reach 10,000 subscribers, man. You know, I know that I know that this channel is quality, man. And you know, I just encourage you all, like if you support me, share my videos with your friends and family, you know, encourage people to subscribe so that we can build this channel together. Yeah, I really appreciate your comment, Lola Jones. I appreciate that. Just bear with me 1 second. Yeah, so a dude's thought said, yeah, the Catholic Church helped one of my aunts out with a shelter they were running. And he said that he donates to Catholic charities sometimes, as well as the Chicago Food Depository and UNICEF. Yeah, so Fresh and Sassy said that she heard about that story too, about the, you know, this 5-year-old girl shot, caught in the crossfire, man. And her sister, again, a 7-year-old who was shot and killed while sitting in the back of a car. It's crazy, man, that this kind of violence occurs in society, man, that we allow this stuff to continue. So Frankie says that, you know, She mentions that these imams have schools and stuff like that in colleges. Those are positive things, good things and stuff like that to develop schools and colleges. Um, my only thing is that, the only issue that I have is that, often those religious schools are for, just people of the faith, people that are Muslim and stuff like that. We need to have things that address the educational issues just of the society in general. So, I commend them for creating those schools. I think those are great things. Even the Nation of Islam has done things. They've created their own schools and stuff like that. And we need to have more of that. That's a positive development. And I think the churches should create their own, create more schools of their own and stuff like that. But and the thing is, like with a lot of those types of schools, they are private schools, so you have to have money to attend those schools, and that doesn't address the larger issues that we're talking about here. We need to have free, quality public education. And while I support private schools and all that kind of stuff, religious schools, I also see that that's not going to cover the needs of the majority of the people in these communities that we're talking about. Um, yeah, so let's see. Just bear with me a second. Yeah, shout out to Fresh and Sassy. I appreciate your support. I'm not familiar with Dr. Rick Wallace. Um, does he have a YouTube channel? Can you tell me a little bit more about him? Yeah, and I'm going to have to sign off in a few, y'all, but I want to thank y'all for tuning in. Just give me 1 second, and happy Thanksgiving to everybody before I go. Oh, I didn't know you were in Baltimore, Fresh and Sassy. Yeah, it's a lot of churches here in Baltimore, and they do need to have more programs and resources. Yeah, and one of the things that I really want to do is I want to interview the people here in Baltimore that are actually putting in the work. And that's what I plan to do. I plan to have an interview with somebody from Baltimore Ceasefire. I want to interview somebody from No Shoot Zone. So you all look out for that. I plan on doing that so that you can hear from people that are actually putting in the work. Oh, okay. So Frankie said they still have that summer jobs program for the youth in Detroit. That's great, man. I just hope that they can build on it to, encourage more people to work. Yeah, I'm trying to get through most of your comments before I go. Yeah, so somebody said programs don't work. It starts in the home. I beg to differ. I mean, it does. The home is important, but programs play a role as well. I mean, and I've talked about that before, so I won't, repeat myself. But programs are important. I don't know why. I really don't understand why trolls come here to. Here we are talking about some important stuff, and you have a couple of trolls that popped up. Yeah, so I want to thank you all for tuning in. I hope that y'all have a happy and blessed Thanksgiving. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Share my videos. Like this video. Um, Hit that notification bell so that you'll know when I'm posting and going live. Peace.